tread lightly when you become a filmmaker, because you're going to love it so much, it's going to ruin your life in all of the most beautiful kinds of ways. I mean, the thing is, you get caught up in all this, like, you know, like when you get your first camera, and if it's an APS-C camera, you're suddenly starting to think about, should I have gotten Micro Four Thirds or should I have gotten full frame? And then you start thinking about 8-bit or 10-bit, and then you get a picture profile from like James Matthews or the guy from Make Art Now, and it looks incredible, and the final image is like HBO quality or like a big movie theater quality, and then you start to realize that it's good enough. But you know, really the bottom line is that when the final image is exactly what you want, then you start applying it to your storytelling, and you're completely consumed and nothing else in your life matters, and then your life is all fucked up, and you're just like a, you know, it's like moving from the theater to filmmaker to musician, like all of that shit. It's just, it takes over. You know, there's like nothing else. It's the most beautiful thing that you could possibly imagine. I was just driving around and I was reflecting upon my filmmaking life, and so I pulled off and I decided to share a video because I think this could be kind of interesting for people and maybe get something out of it, because, you know, becoming a filmmaker kind of ruined my life. I mean, it also enhanced my life incredibly, and you know, I've gotten so much from it. It's been the most beautiful experience, but it's been equal parts disruptive and has really changed the entire trajectory of my career, of what I do, the way I've defined myself for well over a decade. It changed everything. And obviously I was compelled to do this because it is freezing out here, as you can see behind me. Like, this is all solid ice out here. I wanted to shoot it closer to the water, but I couldn't get out there without falling on my ass because it's just solid ice and I didn't feel like breaking my leg. So I figured I'd set up here. I'm in this little overhang. I think they have performances here every once in a while. Anyway, that's the Hudson River behind me. That's the Mid-Hudson Bridge back there. And that's Highland, New York. On the other side, this is Poughkeepsie, New York. And then it's like you get used to the color of your camera. You know, like the picture profile. You know, I get this James Matthews amazing picture profile. I think it was a Cine 4 picture profile. And then I get this nighttime, you know, in the dark picture profile by the Make Art Now guy. Josh, I think his name is. And it's unbelievable. But then I finally use S-Log 2. Not even S-Log 3, but S-Log 2, which I was always kind of afraid to use it, but I finally used it, and it's like, whoa, I feel like I got a brand new camera. And then all of a sudden, I start to realize, like, I don't like to use a gimbal. I need more stabilization. I need to upgrade my camera because I'm getting ready to shoot this other film, and I need some other stuff. And of course, I'm completely consumed with this stuff, and nothing else really matters to me. And then I start the process of looking for another camera. So what happened was the pandemic, and you know, that's happened to a lot of people, but I've been a solo theater artist for a very long time. My whole life was defined by the theater for, like I said, well over 10 years. You know, I was always rehearsing for a play. I was always booked to do a show somewhere. I always had something coming up. My life was just organized in a way where, you know, I had my schedule set up. You know, I rehearsed a certain amount of hours every day, and I was working with collaborators, you know, getting my lighting and my set design and stuff like that, like doing all the things that you do to do a performance. And like I said, it was like that for many years. And so in 2018, I guess, or end of 2017 going to 2018, I got an email one day from after I had signed up for one of those DNA sites, and I got an email from somebody saying, "I know your mother." And I was like, okay. And turns out that this guy was the first cousin of my biological mother, who I had never met, didn't know anything about, been looking for many, many years, have written a bunch of plays about, you know, did a lot of work. A lot of my creative work was based on my very ambivalent search for my biological mother. So anyway, I met this guy, and I had been working on another play for the previous 5 years to that. And I called my director that day, and I was like, yo, I'm not doing Brooklyn Quartet anymore. I got something new I got to work on. So I stopped a 5-year run of a play, which I had done all over the country, and was trying to get some other stuff done with it. I also shot a mini-series based on that play, but I felt compelled to now work on this story, which was the third and final part of a trilogy. I mean, it doesn't really like ruin your life in a bad way, you know what I mean? Like, it ruins your life like the way love ruins your life, you know, like it turns everything upside down, it changes everything, it's like a complete shift. And so in many ways it's beautiful, it's amazing, but you know, it also, change is not always easy. Even when it's the best thing for you, even when it's the healthiest thing, even when it's bringing you to an evolution, which is what life is kind of all about, right? I mean, it's not, maybe it's a bad choice of words saying ruined, but it does, you know, it's like a high-speed car accident and you're totaled, but in the best kind of way. That's the only way I can describe it. I mean, I'm describing it in all kinds of different ways, but I think you know what I mean. Like, it definitely ruins your life, but in a good way, but there are bad parts to it too. But that's life. You know, there's nothing is all good all the time. So anyway, I wrote a play. It's called The Red Plaid Suitcase, and I was to open at the Signature Theater in New York City on June 12th of 2020. And it was a big deal. It was a big, you know, it's a very important theater in New York. It was part of the Downtown Urban Arts Festival, which is, you know, a theater festival, but the Signature is a big deal, and I was more prepared for that play than I'd ever been prepared for anything in my life. I was ready to, like, you know, that was going to be my Super Bowl win, that play. I put everything on. My whole life was on that play. You know, I'd risked a lot, sacrificed a lot. I just, you know, invested so much in that work. And of course, literally, I guess about a month and a half before the play was to open, I was to open the festival on a Saturday night. I think it was a Saturday. It was either a Friday or a Saturday night. It was canceled. Pandemic, COVID. And man, I was fucked up. Like, I was devastated by it. Even though I knew it was coming, you know, when I finally heard the reality of it, I was just broken. You know, my heart, everything was just busted in a billion pieces. And so, not to dwell on that for too long, I decided to do something about it. And so instead of jumping off a bridge, I decided to adapt my theatrical script to a screenplay and make a movie out of The Red Plaid Suitcase. And I actually had the audacity to think that I could do that because I had never even really touched a camera before in my whole life. But I shot that film on my phone. And that's when I started to get into filmmaking. That's when I came to YouTube and started to get really interested in smartphone filmmaking. And I started to study this guy, Sean Baker, who had a film called Tangerine that was like, I think it won Sundance, and it was a very, very highly acclaimed film that was shot on an iPhone. And so I became obsessed with that, and I became obsessed with filmmaking and the art of filmmaking and the technicalities of filmmaking. And I started to learn about, you know, how to use a camera, you know, how to expose, how to deal with things like white balance and ISO settings and things I had never heard of before. Foreground and background and composition and all the kind of things. And, you know, I kind of had a head start because I was a theater artist. I knew about how to write a story. I knew about story structure. I knew about, you know, developing characters and things like that. So I did have a head start in terms of the most important part of making a film or writing a play or doing anything, which was creating the story, the exposition, everything. Like, I knew how to do that. Anyway, you understand what I'm saying, like gimbals, tripods, lights, sound equipment, all the stuff. Like, you just become obsessed with it, and even more so, you start watching every film ever made, every film you've ever seen, every film you've never seen. You just become obsessed with telling the story. It's like, for me, it's like theater on steroids or music on steroids. It just encompasses everything that I've ever learned, you know, like from performing arts to playing instruments to writing. It just includes everything. So anyway, I was obsessed with YouTube, you know, and I met all these YouTubers, these filmmakers, and I just learned so much, and I was astounded at all of the information that was on YouTube for free. I was amazed at that, and I learned and I studied. I went out and I shot every day, every single day, and in fact, I started shooting my film, and for 3 months, I shot and hated everything that I did every day. And I didn't keep anything. And the reason for that was that I was still using my theatrical script, and I realized that I had to abandon that script and adapt it to a screenplay. I had to write a proper screenplay for the film, which I had never done that before either. So I read a bunch of screenplays because I had worked on a film called Jamesy Boy a couple of years before that. I was, you know, lucky enough to get cast in that film. It was a movie about my friend James, actually, and the director and the guy who was pretty much the leader, I think he wrote the film, was Trevor White, who's now since worked with Spielberg and Tom Hanks and people like that. And he was kind enough to send me a bunch of screenplays that he thought were solid screenplays. He was actually trying to encourage me to write a screenplay based on a play that he had seen. He saw a workshop of me do Brooklyn Quartet out in LA, and he was like, yo, this is a movie. Like, you should write a screenplay to this. So he sent me a bunch of screenplays, like a bunch of examples of good screenplays. And so I went back and I studied those screenplays, and I wrote a good screenplay for The Red Plaid Suitcase, but I also had to go through an incredibly difficult mourning process because leaving that theatrical script meant that I was going to leave the memorization of a 2.5-hour play. And needless to say, it takes a lot to do that, and I worked really hard to memorize that play, and I had to let it go. And if I tell you I cried like a baby when I realized I was beginning that process, like I was going through a lot of emotional turmoil during this time. So I wrote the screenplay and I started to shoot, and I started to actually like what I was shooting. And, you know, while I was developing the screenplay, I was equal parts learning how to be a filmmaker. Because, like I said, I was shooting every day, and I became obsessed with it. And in fact, I fell in love with filmmaking. I started to really just learn so much from people like Brandon Lee and Danny Gewirtz and Potato Jet, and, you know, all these amazing filmmakers, Mark Bone, you know, people who, you know, really taught me so much. They were like mentors to me, which sounds weird because obviously they don't know who I am, and I never met them, and I wasn't friends with them or anything like that, but I learned so much, and I owe them so much. And I shot this film, and this film became an award-winning film. Literally. Like, it won so many laurels that I couldn't even fit them on one poster. Best feature film, best smartphone film, best actor, best original score. Thank you, Steve Peckman. I mean, it just won so many awards, but they were all virtual festivals. The first one was the Milan Gold Award, which is in Milan, Italy, and because of the pandemic, everything was virtual. There was nothing in a theater. So it was kind of empty. You know, even though it was exciting to be acknowledged like that, it was kind of empty. And anyway, so after I finished that film, I decided I wanted to get myself a proper camera. And so, I don't know if you remember, but, you know, at the time, President Biden got us these $1,200 payment checks for the pandemic. And so I used mine to buy a Sony a6400 APS-C camera. And it was funny because when I first got it, it came with a kit lens. And I also bought a 35mm f1.8, you know, a Sony lens, because it was relatively inexpensive, and it was like Brandon Lee's favorite focal length, even though I didn't even realize that he was talking about 35mm full frame lens, and I had an APS-C camera, so it was really a 52mm lens. And so anyway, when I first started using the camera, I actually contacted the guy who sold it to me and told him it was broken because I couldn't get a good image out of it because I had no idea what I was doing with a real camera. You know, I didn't really know about aperture because the only thing I couldn't control on my phone was the aperture. And so it took me a long time to relearn how to now be a filmmaker with a camera. And I became obsessed. And I wound up like buying every APS-C lens that I could find. I started swapping back and forth. I never really spent much money because I kept buying and selling, buying and selling. I did everything on eBay or MPB. And so my favorite lens became the, I think it was Samyang 12mm f2, I think. And it was a 18mm equivalent. And I love that lens so much. And I also love the 18-105 zoom lens. But I noticed that I wasn't really into a zoom lens. Like, I was only using it as an 18mm lens. And what I realized later was that 18mm was really 27mm, which was the focal length of my phone, my LG V40. Interesting, because that's what I was used to. So anyway, I became obsessed, and then I decided to shoot another film, which is the third and final part of a trilogy, which became This Is the End for me. And I wanted to upgrade my camera because now that I was learning, I realized that I needed stabilization for the way I was going to shoot. And the A6400 didn't have any stabilization. I feel like it's taken, it took me my whole life to get there. It took me going through a lot of different experiences and doing a lot of different things, and it just allows me to use everything that I have, everything that I am. And it's just cool. So yeah, it ruined my life. without a doubt, it changed everything. It changed my perspective. It changed the way I look at the world. It changed the way I think. It changed the way I can share. It gives me an art form that's not disposable like theater, because when I do theater, it's gone. Once I do this performance with these amazing audience members, we have this beautiful shared experience, but then it's gone forever. And with filmmaking, I get to make something that endures, that'll last forever. And that, I can go back and remember. And so I started, going back into all these videos and trying to figure out what kind of camera I needed to get better stabilization. And also, I was going to be shooting a lot at night. And so I realized that I wanted to get a full frame camera and I needed stabilization. So since I was working Sony and I was part of this Sony thing where, I knew all these Sony content creators, I wanted to get a FX3. Or an A7S III, but I didn't really want to spend $4,000 and then even more to get full frame lenses. And so I just started to do a deep dive, and I found this guy Patrick Tomaso, and he started talking about the Panasonic S5, and then I found all these other videos about the S5, and I was like, that's my camera. And I became obsessed with that. And still, I was shooting every day. Like, from the day I started shooting with my phone, I was never without a camera, and I did not have a day in my life without shooting. And same thing to this day. I have shot every single day since that time. So how did it ruin my life? Because this sounds like a pretty good story, right? Well, it ruined my life because I completely pulled away from theater because I was suddenly like a full-time filmmaker. And all of a sudden I was getting hired to do stuff for other people. Like I shot a short film for somebody, I did a short documentary, I've helped people do other things. Like I've gotten paid for being a filmmaker, which sounds crazy to me, but I have. And my films have done well for me, and I suddenly got monetized on YouTube, and then I got Patreon, and I started to make money. And people did ask me to come back and reopen the Red Plaid Suitcase as a play, but I was like, you're going to have to pay me so much money to do that. You're going to have to pay me for like a year of my life, because I have to re-memorize 2.5 hours of a script. I have to get collaborators back together. I got to put it all back together. It's incredibly difficult. And so while I was in the theater world constantly for all that time, for well over a decade, I had everything in place, and I was rehearsing every day, and I had everything like it was part of my lifestyle. My workflow was to be memorizing all the time, every day, which has served me well, because as I'm working on my films, I'm memorizing my scripts easily, because memorizing for a film is easy compared to a play, because I'm doing chunks at a time. I'm not doing the whole thing at one time. Like in a play, I'm on stage for 2.5 hours. So I can memorize 5, 10, 18 pages, no problem, compared to a 250-page script. I used to like that theater was just here for the moment, and whoever was there, we were the only people who get to experience this moment in time together. I mean, I appreciated that, but I don't know, as I get older, I think more of legacy and, just leaving things here and making some kind of contribution that remains after you're gone. And so, yeah, filmmaking, it just fucked me up, ruined my life in the best possible way that I could imagine. I feel so grateful and so fortunate. It's just amazing. And yeah, it's kind of ruined my life because it's changed my whole life. And I'm thinking of doing a play in 2026, and I got to figure out how to get my workflow back and how to incorporate it with filmmaking. And so I'm kind of caught in the middle, you know, and I'm definitely going to continue being a filmmaker, and I'm all the way in, and I love it so much, and I become really good at it, you know, but I also realize that there's never a time where you're good enough to stop learning, and it takes so much to really be good at this craft. And you do have to shoot every day. You have to study this. You have to respect it, you know, for what it is. But theater is the same way, and in many ways theater is even more of a commitment and less of a payback unless you go to Broadway. And even then, it's definitely an art form that is a disposable art form, because, you know, once you do theater, it's live and then it's gone. And it's also an art form that does not pay as much as, you know, I've gotten paid more for doing filmmaking than I ever got paid doing theater. Although, you know, I got paid well for theater sometimes, like doing, say, a 5 or 8 show run somewhere and getting paid anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 per performance. It's not bad, but then there are months and months where you don't work, and I could work more consistently doing filmmaking. Even though, you know, I don't do events, I don't do weddings, stuff like that. I'm doing narrative work. So anyway, I'm just saying, being a filmmaker can ruin your life in many ways, because you can get stuck in the rabbit hole of buying equipment, which I don't do. I'm still using the original Panasonic S5. I got vintage lenses and 2 anamorphic lenses that were both cheap. My Siri anamorphics cost me $750 combined for the 35mm and the 75mm. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that. I mean, it's just, you know, tread lightly if that's what you want to do, because if you're really about that life, and if it's something that you're really serious about, if you understand commitment, and if you're really willing to learn and do the work every day, I'm telling you, it'll be the best thing you've ever done in your life. Yeah, if you're an artist, I think it'll be the best. That's what I think. And so, just, I'm not going to stay out here much longer because I'm freezing, but I just want to say, it's easy to get obsessed with gear, which I'm not, but I am obsessed with the art of filmmaking. I am in love with it, and I'm never going to stop doing it. But I do think I'm going to do a play in 2026, and that's going to be interesting. It's going to be hard for me to do, and I'm a little afraid. I have a little bit of trepidation moving forward. Like, can I still do that? It's physically demanding. 2.5 hours with an incredible amount of energy, one person on stage, keeping people's attention, just looking at one guy. I've always been able to do that. I've had a gift of being able to do that. And so filmmaking had me step away from it for a long time, since the pandemic, and I haven't done a play since then, but I am going to do one in 2026. So we'll see what happens. And I believe it's going to be the Red Plaid Suitcase, because what I'm doing is I'm working on a film right now, the Red Plaid Suitcase, which is based on my theatrical script and based on this story that I just told you now. So wish me luck with that. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, in addition to please subscribe and please hit the like button and all that stuff, I want to talk about my Patreon members. I'm going to start to include shout outs to them on every one of these videos. I'm just going to roll their names, and you'll be able to see them here at the end of every video from now on, because the people who are supporting me at my Patreon are like my angels, you know, literally real life superhero people in my life. And so consider being a part of that. It keeps me going, and it something that I will never take for granted and makes me emotional thinking about sometimes. So thank you so much to my Patreon members. You'll see your names scrolling on every video from now on here on YouTube, and you'll still be getting stuff that YouTube people don't get. So to everybody else, thank you so much. I love you guys. And yeah, tread lightly when you become a filmmaker, because you're going to love it so much, it's going to ruin your life in all of the most beautiful kinds of ways.